Hello guys, I'm back with another book review. This time I am back with The Sword of Destiny, Book 2, or I guess now that Season of Storms is out, Book 3 in the Witcher series. I know it's been a while since my review of the last book in the Witcher series, but I've been really busy. So for that and reasons I'll get to in a moment within this review, it took me a while to read this book. But anyway, I'm here now with it, so let's get into it. Now, Sword of Destiny is, again, a collection of short stories just like The Last Wish. And I actually found myself liking this book more than I did Last Wish. And I didn't completely dislike The Last Wish. Wasn't my favorite book, but I didn't dislike it, and this one actually I found to be better. Now, I want this review to be a little more organized and a little less rambly than my last book review, so I've got my notes here on some points I want to talk about. And I want to start with the good points because unfortunately there are very few of them compared to bad points. But anyway, let's get into it. The first thing I really like about this book is that despite the fact it's short stories, which if you watched my last review you already know is not my favorite form of writing, but these were actually longer short stories. So that means instead of kind of your introduction, rising action, climax, falling action being, like that, you get a little bit more rising action. Your climax looks, your climax looks a little bit more detailed, a little bit longer, or maybe you get a bit better of a resolution within each individual story, instead of it just being boom, 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 done. So I like that they were a little bit longer. Second is that the stories within this book take place chronologically and with a relatively decent time frame. In The Last Wish, I couldn't tell if the stories took place in order at all, let alone which time frame they came in. Now, you're never given a specific time frame in which one story happens to another within this book either. However, you do get the impression that they take place within a decent amount of time frame and not years later. Another thing I liked about the stories within Sword of Destiny was that they were more action related. Now, that's not to say it is an action related book. It's certainly not an action-packed book. In fact, I think he only kills one monster in here. But that's the point I'll get to in a moment. However, there is a little bit more action to it, and you feel like more's going on other than just idle, everyday happenings. You feel like there are, I guess the best way to put it is that there are bigger events. Not so much that there's more action. I mean, there is, but it's not Geralt or the main characters performing it directly. It's more just the events or the scenes they take place in are more action-packed. Finally, the thing I actually liked about this book, and it's kind of contradictory to a lot of other reviews, but I like the way some of the women were portrayed in this. And no, I'm not a sexist, and I know a lot of the other reviews I've read complained about it, and about the author and his sexist outlook on some of the stuff, and I'm not saying he is or isn't sexist. In fact, I would argue he's not, simply because this is a fictional world, so the culture in which men and women react within this world could be set up this way, so I wouldn't find that to be a sexist way of thinking or way of doing it. That just may be how he thinks it fits into his world, so I don't necessarily see a problem with that. But what I liked about it is that what you see in a lot of modern pop culture, whether it be movies, video games, books, or anything else, is if there is an immoral person in a relationship, say one person's cheating on another or something like that, it is almost always the guy. And that gets to be a bit worn out. I mean, whether it's more often the guy or the girl, and I would say that realistically it probably happens about the same amount. It gets a little bit worn out because that's, what's happening. If somebody's cheating on somebody within some story, it's the guy, it's always, and it's not with this book. What you find actually is that Yennefer is cheating on Geralt, and don't get me wrong, Geralt's cheating on Yennefer too. But you get a little bit more to Geralt's head, he feels bad about it, but for some reason he still does it, but he does feel bad about it. But Yennefer does it, and she doesn't feel bad about it. And in fact, she does it and makes excuses for why it's okay that she does it, but then gets mad at Geralt for doing it. So it's kind of interesting to see this reverse of roles where the woman's the one cheating and thinking it's okay, but doesn't want her boyfriend or whatever Geralt is to her to be doing it. So it's just a refreshing outlook, or rather a refreshing change of outlook on those kind of situations. Now, given the time frame in which this was actually written, or the how much older it is. It's probably not actually a refreshing change. It's probably written when that was a little more common to see, but at least in the time frame that I'm reading it, it's a little bit refreshing. Now onto the bad things within the story. The very first story, Bounds of Reason, had a logistical issue. Now, I will explain what the logistical issue was here in a second, but whether to say it's a plot issue, like an actual plot hole, or just a logistical issue, depends on how you look at it. I believe plot hole is a term that's thrown around way too often. In order for something to be a plot hole, it has to be something that doesn't make sense, that it should or shouldn't have happened based on the story, but because it happened or because it didn't happen, it affected the outcome of the story. When realistically or physically it shouldn't have happened that way. That's a plot hole. If there's just some issue that doesn't make sense, that doesn't necessarily make it a plot hole. For example, if in your story somebody's sitting there and bullets start flying, for example, and they start bouncing off this TV. And so then the character gets up and starts shooting back. That's not, I mean, it's a logistical issue because bullets would go straight through a TV. It's not a plot issue. However, if you say the bullets started flying and he took cover behind the TV and the TV was stopping them, then that would probably be a plot hole because realistically the bullets would have gone through the TV and killed the character. So that would have changed the outcome. So that's kind of the difference. But anyway, the issue is here, I'm going to try to do this without revealing any thing within the story or any spoilers. Because when I do reviews, I try really hard not to do spoilers because a lot of people watch or read reviews for the purpose of deciding whether or not they want to purchase that book, movie, game, whatever I'm reviewing. So to give spoilers is kind of pointless within the review. But anyway, the characters are crossing this bridge with this army to kill this dragon. And the bridge ends up collapsing. And you find out why it collapses later, but I won't get that away. Not really a spoiler, but just need to know information really. But anyway, the bridge collapses and there's this huge scene about people falling and dying and how Geralt barely makes it out of it, and that's not really a spoiler considering it's the first story within the book, so you can probably assume he's going to get out of it. But anyway, he gets out of it, and then at one point this king of the army decides, you know what, no, we're not going to kill this dragon, let's leave. And so they turn around and leave. Well, it was the only bridge across this ravine. It actually goes into a bit of a description of how the only other way, other than this bridge across this ravine, is to go all the way around the mountains by the dragon to get this other path. But they just turn around and go back. Well, they shouldn't have been able to do that because the bridge was out. So it's definitely a logistical issue. They shouldn't have been able to do that. But you could have argued, oh, it's not a plot hole, or it's not that big of a deal because they could have just walked around instead. However, you can also argue that it was a plot hole because if they had walked that way, they would have been walking right by the dragon. The dragon would think, oh, I'm being attacked or something, and attacked him and decimated the army, or maybe the army killed the dragon. And so that could have changed the outcome of the story. So could be a plot hole, but then again, maybe the author could have easily written in that they basically say, hey, we're not attacking you or whatever, and walked on. So definitely a logistical issue. Whether or not it's a plot hole is really to be decided by the individual. But anyway, at another point, this other character, I can't remember his name, but he was just kind of a minor character, ends up going to get help. And he, again, turns around and runs across that destroyed bridge. And then comes back the other path with help. Which is a really weird thing to do. It's weird to forget about it in these two circumstances, but then remember the bridge is out in the other circumstance. But then again, the author may have put it in there coming back to the second path, not because he suddenly remembered the bridge was out, but more just because he was trying to flank the dragon or something. But either way, so he wouldn't have been able to go get help. And actually, I believe this one, I would say, is a plot hole because he wouldn't have been able to leave. And I think based on information given within the story that I'm not going to give away here, I feel like the dragon would have attacked him and killed him, so he wouldn't have been able to get the help. So, because the dragon is intelligent, so the army could have said, hey, we're not attacking, we're leaving, and the dragon probably would let him go. However, the dragon was had some sort of magical abilities that weren't completely explored, but he could talk using more of like some sort of telepathy, so he might have been able to read the guy who's running to get help to fight the dragon could have read his mind and known what he's up to, so I would consider that one a plot hole. Anyway, that was the only one of those I found within the story, but it definitely is an issue. The other issue I had, which was one actually I had with The Last Wish, was just it is insane amounts of dialogue. And as I said with my review of The Last Wish, I really don't care for stories that are all dialogue, but I can tolerate them. Usually that's not going to prevent me from finishing the novel. If I knew it ahead of time, I may not pick up the novel, but then again I might, but it's probably not going to prevent me from finishing it. And that's actually one of the reasons though that it took me so long to finish this book, is because while it's not enough to make me stop reading the book after I had read it the first time, or after I had already read it with one book, in The Last Wish, and then going into the second book, it really started to wear on me, and I just got really tired of reading all this dialogue. I mean, it is the pinnacle of tell and don't show, because there's not really any detail, which I'll get into in a second, because everything is told. It's just, the difference isn't, it's not told by the author, it's just told by the characters. And there are many actions or things within the world that you find out about simply because somebody says something. And I find that to be an issue. It's kind of boring. It doesn't really give you a whole lot of a picture within the world. And I personally like to get those details, like to get those pictures. Now, it is definitely a technique you can use in your writing. Instead of saying, you know, hey, there's a tree root there, and describing it and then them avoiding it, you can simply say, have one of the characters say, watch out for the tree root. And now you get the picture, okay, there's a tree root there. And that's okay to use sometimes within your writing, but it is more of a technique to be, you know, to supplement description and everything, so that it's breaking up the monotony of, here's this item, describe it, here's this item, describe it. You know, you don't have to do that every time, and this is a way to prevent you from doing that. Just kind of have the characters say it. But when that happens throughout the entire book, within every story, it becomes annoying, and you sit there craving for that detail, for that visual image that's just not given to you. Now, as I said, because the book was all dialogue, there wasn't a lot of detail. And having an all dialogue book doesn't leave a lot of room for detail, because everything's being said, not shown. And there were points in which there was a decent amount of description, and the author did do a good job. So it's not like he lacks the capability of describing things, it just, he doesn't do it. But then there were other points in which he described things and used adverbs, and adverbs were everywhere. Now, any even, you know, new author or reader knows adverbs are considered lazy writing. You know, don't just say quietly, describe how quietly. And it's okay to use adverbs from time to time, but not everywhere. And Sapkowski just uses it absolutely everywhere. However, I'm willing to chalk some of this up to the translation, because I was talking with a reader of the series in the comments of my last review over The Last Wish, and he mentioned that in Polish there are a lot of different ways to communicate information in the language, at least the written language, that you can't do in English. For example, he said something about using different contractions, and so you can use a contraction within a word to both show the meaning of the word, the gender of the person or that's saying it, or it's the action that's being taking place, what gender is taking, doing the action, whether or not the action was completed, and whether it's plural or not, all within just one word. And that's actually really impressive. That would be a whole other video, a whole other topic. So that's a lot of information within a single word, and he mentioned that can be quite hard to do in the English language, and I completely agree. That's a lot of information. So the translator would have had a big task and a big decision on his hands, whether to keep the writing as close to the original and have it potentially being wordy, change it slightly so it says you get the gist of it, but it uses a lot of adverbs, or change it so you get all the information in a not so wordy manner and something that's really detailed. So it looks like the translator decided to just use the adverbs to fill in for some of that information. So I can understand why it was done. I'm not necessarily blaming Sapkowski for that more, but that'd probably be an issue with the translation. Another problem with the detail is that at times when there was detail, it was done metaphorically. Now, I'm not criticizing the use of metaphors within books or within stories, and especially not criticizing it even to show detail. I do it a lot in my own writing, and I love doing it. However, there's a way to do it. You don't want it to be you don't really want it to be the only form of detail. When you lack a lot of detail because your book is mostly dialogue, your other detail comes from adverbs, and then your other detail that's not adverbs comes from metaphors, it doesn't work. Just like using dialogue to describe an object or even say something's happening can be used to supplement actual description, using metaphorical descriptions can be used to supplement actual description, but you need to have the actual description there to work. Again, I love using metaphors to describe things. However, I also actually just describe things when I'm writing. This doesn't do that. So when I finally get a description of something, it's done in a metaphorical manner that isn't polishing off the description. So, for example, if you said somebody had sharp facial features, thin eyebrows, and maybe pointed ears because they're an elf, with blonde hair that was pulled back in a ponytail and had an angled chin, you'd be like, okay, it's a pretty good description. But if you said they just had an angled chin, it doesn't really work as well. You get the same idea. It's still maybe a thin, straight chin or jawline, or it may be the equivalent of saying they've got a chiseled face. But by itself, it just doesn't really work. It doesn't complete the image. It only completes the image on top of actual description. And so it's really disappointing to not receive much description. And when I do, it's done with an adverb that says quickly or quietly. And at certain points, it's done in a redundant manner. You won't just say quietly, softly, gently, and then go on. And it's like, I got it the first time. I mean, it's bad enough that you're using adverbs everywhere, but on top of that, you're using 3 redundant adverbs in a row to describe one thing. But anyway, back to my main point. So it's really annoying to not get much description, and then when I do, it's either an adverb or a standalone metaphorical description that's not really built on anything. So it doesn't really get used to its maximum effect. It's not implemented in a manner that I think would be best. Another couple of problems I have with the book is there's a lot of inconsistencies. One of the first inconsistencies goes with Geralt's code. And I put code in air quotes because, well, I'm not really sure what it is. I mean, it's referred to as his code, but it's not ever really explained. Is it just his personal code? Is it a Witcher code? Is it a combination of the two? What is it? He never really describes what that code is. And even then, it's not consistent. At one point, it might be, he doesn't kill dragons because there's not many of them left. So he wants to hunt monsters because they're harming humanity, but unless there's just one left. And it just doesn't really make sense. And part of the subplot or sub-theme of the Witcher books are that humanity is the real monsters, not the monsters out there he's killing, which is inconsistent. If humanity is the real monsters, why does he only kill monsters? Up until he doesn't for some vague, because of my code, reason. And it gets really annoying. Like, if he doesn't want to kill a monster or a creature because of this code, okay, but I think it needs to be described, it needs to be well defined, and it needs to be consistent, and it's not. And the other problem is, your career is killing monsters, but you have a code against killing monsters. It doesn't really make sense within the world at all. Another inconsistency is Geralt's mutations. Now, these mutations are supposed to make him the ultimate fighting machine, but he doesn't fight a lot of times because of his code. Anyway, and these mutations affect his emotions. So it's referred to multiple times. He doesn't have emotions. He doesn't have emotions. He just has mimicking emotions. Basically, he's reacting at certain points in a way that emotions might make him react, but not because he's feeling the emotion, but rather just because he's mimicking. It's kind of a learned thing rather than actual feeling. At least that's how it's described within the book. But for an emotionless killing machine, he's quite emotional and quite whiny. And while I understand making a character seem more human makes it easier for the readers to connect with them, because readers often connect to characters on an emotional level, so it can be difficult to get that connection when your main character has no emotions. However, he doesn't have just like a little bit of emotion. He is at times quite emotional and, like I said, borderline whiny, and it doesn't really fit. He's supposed to be this emotionless killing machine, and he's really this whiny, I won't kill it because of my code. And again, it's just not consistent. My other problem with the consistency in this book is people's feelings towards Witchers. I mean, it is overly stated that people hate Witchers. They don't trust them. And even that in and of itself is sort of inconsistent. Like, if Witchers kill monsters to protect humans, why do they hate them? I mean, if there's something that's a consistent threat to me, and somebody else comes along and takes care of that threat, I would, even if I don't consider the person who takes care of that threat a friend, at the very least I'd consider him, not an enemy. But for some reason people hate Witchers. But anyway, that wasn't my main point. The point is that people hate him, at least as far as the book says, over and over and over. But every time he meets a girl, they throw their panties at him. And my problem with this isn't related to sexism, as in all women are just considered sex objects, whatever. Because this is a fictional world, it is a fictional story. If that's the culture of it, if that's the way that the characters and different genders react with each other within this world, okay, as long as it fits within the world and fits within the story. The problem is it doesn't fit within the story, because everybody hates him, but then every time he meets a girl, they want to have sex with them. And again, it doesn't make sense. If everybody hates him, why do they also want to have sex with him? It doesn't make sense. And again, this isn't related to a sexist reasoning why I don't like this. It's just because it doesn't make sense within the universe that Sapkowski has created. So there were quite a few bad points I mentioned within this book, but that's not to say it's a bad book. I'd give it probably about 3 stars. Again, I did like it better than The Last Wish. Sorry, my camera died right at the end of recording, so I'm just going to continue it here and finish up this video with just some audio. But yeah, I didn't think Sword of Destiny was a bad book. I'd give it about 3 stars, and I did like it more than The Last Wish. I think the reason that I have so many bad points but would still give it a 3-star rating is that because the things I liked about it were good. They were quite good. But the problems I had with it were relatively minor. There were numerous, but they were relatively minor. And I would actually say probably the biggest issue would be either the dialogue and its overusage, or the lack of use of proper description. And those 2 issues kind of go hand in hand, so you could consider them the same issue. So yeah, I'd probably say the biggest one, and this one I would even argue is a big issue, is just too much dialogue and not enough description. But the other things like the logistical issue and some of the inconsistencies, they're just relatively minor problems. However, they do get annoying after having read one book that has these minor problems, and then the bigger problem of too much dialogue, and then going into a second book like that, it gets a bit annoying, and I don't think I'm going to be continuing the series. Maybe not indefinitely, but I'm definitely going to take a pause and read some other books and kind of venture out, and maybe eventually I'll come back to it. Who knows? But anyway, I don't want to just mention what I like about a book and what I dislike, but maybe I like to talk about some things that could be improved with the book. And I think that's something I'm going to start doing, because I'm going to start doing these book reviews a little more often. And yeah, I don't want to just compliment and then criticize. I'd rather end it on a good note, to start and end on a good note. So starting with the good points, in the middle will be the bad points, and at the end I want to mention some things I think that can make the story better. Now for this book, it's not so much an improvement for the book. I mean, obviously some of the improvements could be just don't do the things I didn't like. And a lot of them are personal opinions. I know people who like extremely heavy dialogue books. They want that dialogue. They want that manner of character interaction. It's just not for me. But anyway, this improvement I have in mind is more related to the series as a whole, which you could say isn't really relevant since I've only read 2 of the books. But I think the biggest improvement they can have, if Sapkowski had put these short stories at the end of the series, not the beginning. Again, I'm not a fan of short stories, but I can do it. But I think what would have been better is to give the readers a story, or maybe even a series of stories, that whether they connect or it's one story spread out over books, or several books, and each one's kind of its own story. And at the end of it, the fans of the series are going to want more, and then you give them a book or two of short stories. So you get little pieces to fill in here or there just to give a little bit more of a hint and a taste of The Witcher and his world. And so it just gives them that little extra, or not just one piece, but several small pieces. And I think that would be fine. That's what John Flanagan did with Ranger's Apprentice. He had 10 books. His 11th book was a short story. The short stories did a couple of things. They gave fans of the series, like myself, just a little bit more content to chew on and consume. And it also is a great medium and a great format in which you could correct some potential inconsistencies within the series, because they do happen. And even answer some questions. For example, John Flanagan had a reader question what the Rangers did with their horses, because horses are only good for so many years. And within the series, it had been several years. It had been about the time at which the main character would have had to get rid of his horse, because it would have just been too old and too weak to do what he needed it to do. So he used a short story to explain this, and it's really useful. However, if you put the short stories at the beginning, the readers don't really have that connection to the characters to keep them reading through these short stories. You don't have the chance to address inconsistencies or questions because nobody has them yet, because it's done at the beginning of the story. And I think it would just have been better to overall put the short stories at the end. But anyway, that's my opinion on it. If you like this review, check out my other reviews. I've got one for The Last Wish, if you haven't seen already, and I've got one for In Between Life and Death, The In-Betweener. I will have a link to where you can purchase The Last Wish in the description. I will also have a link to where you can purchase my book, After the Last Battle, in the description as well. As always, thank you for watching.